This is the Hack the Government panel. We've got some really good speakers today, really interesting stories from the private sector, now protecting the U.S. from the bad hackers. So please come on up, Mike Chung and Jacob Kaplan-Moss. As Martin mentioned at the outset, we now have a program called Hack the Pentagon, and it's official. I suspect hacking the Pentagon's been going on for decades, but it's now. You helped make it official, which is cool. But before we get into the details of that, I think it's a really cool story. You guys both left impressive corporate jobs. You probably made a lot of money. You know, you were at Apple, Mike. You were at Heroku, Jacob. So tell us a little bit before we go into the details of Hack the Pentagon and Hack the Government of how you made that journey, Mike.
Yeah, so it was strange. I was introduced to Todd Park, who was, I think he was CTO at the time for President Obama. And I remember we had some discussions about kind of my background and how it was interesting to him and how I would be a good fit for government. Now, I'm a former Navy guy, and working for government while I'm here in the Bay Area didn't sound too appealing to me. So I'm having this conversation with Todd, and he's in the back of an Uber on his way to the airport. And in this 10-minute conversation, he must have quoted George Washington, Abe Lincoln, and a bunch of other presidents, which, you know, in my mind, is probably an American flag waving on the top of this Uber as he headed to the airport. Fast forward 4 months later, found myself in the interview process because it was really intriguing to me in having the opportunity to serve in a different capacity. Not only did I serve in the military, but to be able to serve and help the federal government with its technology initiatives. My focus was first helping with the VA, but I found much more interesting projects within Department of Defense, which is where I'm at today. Today, I currently run the Hack the Pentagon program, which has been named a number of times. We've run about, I want to say, 6 bug bounties within the last 12 months, but my goal really for the next 12 months is to 10x that and to run 50 to 60. So I want to help scale this program and really allow hackers, researchers to be able to tell us where our weaknesses are. Better to have a white hat hacker than someone else.
And Mike, very quickly, what were you doing before?
So at Apple, I was managing the health, fitness, and medical app categories in the App Store. So got to work with a number of developers, some small scale, some larger corporations like Nike and Under Armour, helping them with their apps and digital initiatives.
Great. And Jacob?
I was laughing listening to your story because I have a very similar one, and Todd Park also is a huge reason why I ended up joining 18F. I had a friend, Jackie Kazel, I knew from the Python community, who was one of the early employees at 18F, and she, we had a discussion with her, and I was kind of like, yeah, it sounds kind of interesting, and she's like, all right, you're going to call from Todd Park, and you're going to sign up after that. And I swear he's got like the West Wing theme on you know, playing in the background on his phone. And there's a weird thing that happens when someone says your country needs you. Like, it sounds super trite, and you think you only see it on TV, but like he said it, and it worked, and I joined. I was the director of security at Heroku, which was a great job in almost every way. Super challenging, really interesting, great technology, great people, but at the end of the day, it's it's making a little bit more money for a public company. And the opportunity to use my skills and use the things that I know to actually make individuals' lives better. Since joining 18F, I've worked with the California Child Welfare Service on systems that track children in the system, in abusive homes, in foster homes, and in adoption agencies. I've worked with systems that help veterans get health care. I've worked with all sorts of different opportunities there that actually sort of directly impact people's lives. And one of the real challenges we have, facing government is that so when a company that you give information to gets breached, you can choose another company. Like if Target gets hacked and you decide you don't think their protections are good enough, you can shop at Walmart instead. When your government gets breached, like you got to pay your taxes. The IRS doesn't care whether you trust them or not. You still got to give them money. And so when the government gets breached, our trust in government falls. And by most measures, we're at an all-time low in public trust in the US government. And obviously, digital security and privacy is only one part of that, but it's like, I can move the needle there. I probably can't move the needle in other places, but I can move the needle there. So we talk about 18F as our job is that we are internal consultants for the US government. We're staffed by federal employees and we do work for other federal agencies. But really, the open secret is that it's a Trojan horse for culture change. We're trying to change the way the government buys and builds software by introducing the best practices we've learned from private industry. It's a little weird for me to be up here talking to a bunch of people operating bug bounties in private and like as if I'm supposed to share some lessons learned, because in many ways our philosophy is that we don't really do anything that interesting. The only thing that we do that's exciting is that we're doing it inside a government context. We're trying to take the things we already know work about building software and then apply them inside a government context.
Well, can you guys give us little details how you made that happen? I've worked for the government too, and I agree with you about the mission and serving your country, but the reality is like a whole lot of sitting in cubicles and photocopiers and fax machines, and the culture of government is something really, really hard to change. So how hard was it to get Hack the Pentagon off the ground?
So Hack the Pentagon was launched when Secretary Carter was Secretary of Defense, and it was his really his initiative that helped drive this, right? So if you can think about it, you think about the DoD and you think about the Pentagon, the Department of Defense, and you come up with the idea and pitch them an idea of, hey, let's run a Hack the Pentagon program. The initial response was not great, but the great thing about kind of my group and the Defense Digital Services, we're not the norms within the government, right? We're a bunch of transplanted technologists who show up to work in jeans and sneakers, and in some cases, my boss would show up to meet with the Secretary of Defense in shorts and flip-flops, and to really push the envelope. So the initial challenges were pretty high, but it took a lot of discussions, a lot of support from HackerOne, a lot of research that was done beforehand to really push this idea. And if you think about it, from the time that this idea was pushed and pitched to the leadership within the Pentagon and the time that it was announced to launch was pretty quick, right? So if DoD assets and DoD websites and DoD kind of technology infrastructure is somewhat outdated, but no one really knew how much. So the idea of Hack the Pentagon was really a pilot. The pilot proved to be successful. We ran it for 4 weeks across 5 public websites and found over 130 vulnerabilities, validated vulnerabilities. And we found this in the course of 4 weeks. Prior to that, across those same websites, I think whoever was maintaining the assets found 30 vulnerabilities across over the course of 3 years. Now think about that for a second. Standard operating procedure for DoD was that they had these researchers and pen testers maintain these 5 websites, and over the course of 3 years, they found 30 vulnerabilities. In 4 weeks, we found 138. So just the sheer number, the volume, and the financial model proved so successful that now we have groups within DoD coming to us and asking us how we can implement these with their programs. So it's proven very successful, but I will say 90% of the work was really getting support internally, cutting the bureaucracy, turning no's into yeses, being in 3-hour-long meetings, 4-hour-long phone conferences, day in and day out, and just trying to convince people. But the pilot proved so successful that, that we're really looking to scale this across DoD and trying to better serve the government.
Yeah, the interesting thing about that culture change aspect is that my experience has been there's a lot of appetite to see change and to do things differently. I have not interacted with a ton of folks in my time in government who look at the way the government builds software and say, yeah, this is fine, we're doing fine. So we didn't really face what I would call any resistance, and some of that was helped because Mike's group and we had sort of Hack the Pentagon success to point to look, if the DoD can do it, and we're a civilian agency, we have a much higher risk tolerance than, and a totally different risk profile, so it's in many ways easier for us. The difficult part for us was because so the agency I'm part of, the General Services Administration, provides shared services to other government agencies, and so it's really important that anything we do be replicable. We want to make sure that we leave ourselves open for potentially assisting other agencies in doing similar programs, that we purchase things in a way that other programs can purchase, and that we really document and explain what we do in a way that hopefully other people can pick up and run with, even if we're not involved.
So, Jacob, which agencies are sort of mimicking the Hack the Pentagon model?
I'm not really sure exactly what other groups are doing the sort of thing around the government, especially within the sort of the military side of the government. I'm more familiar with sort of civilian agencies. There's been a lot of interest. I've talked with security people and CIOs and such from probably a dozen other agencies at this point. So far, no one has come and done something. The IRS has been doing some work with SYNAC, doing sort of their version of a bug bounty program, I believe. But other than that, I don't know of anyone going super far. One of the big constraints is that buying things as a government agency is really hard. Procurement is its whole wonky set of rules and such. And especially buying new things. A lot of the time spent between when we decided we wanted to do this and when we actually were able to spin things up was just figuring out how to explain to sort of procurement lawyers what even we were buying. It's a fairly difficult thing to explain, and the fact that...
Can you give us a couple examples of what you found when you got there and what you'd like to have instead?
In terms of procurement? Well, so the biggest thing is government wants to know what it's getting for its money, but when you're buying a bug bounty, you're purchasing something that's unknown. We can't say there are going to be 40 vulnerabilities and we're going to pay $500 per vulnerability. We don't know, right? We're paying to remove uncertainty, and so there's no real way to project costs. Luckily, there is fairly good industry data published by platform operators like HackerOne and BugCrowd and others that helps us do some projections. So far, our projections have been moderately close to reality, but one of the main reasons that we structured the program the way we did, it's a pilot. I was pretty selective in which applications we allowed into the pilot so that I can gather data and have better, more high fidelity data that I can use to project, costs and activity for future programs.
And when you decide to launch a program, Mike, how do you decide the surface of attack? Is that a lot of consideration goes into that, or how do you define what you're going to open up, especially given it's U.S. military?
It's like anything, right? It's you want to take baby steps first to prove the model, which we've done. And as the exercise evolve, as the Hack the Pentagons become a little bit more complex, we try to be creative in terms of how would a enemy nation state infiltrate us, right? So it depends on the system, it depends on who the stakeholders are, but at least I try to push the envelope a little bit and trying to be a little bit more creative on how these should run. I mean, doing the same, okay, we're gonna recruit X amount of researchers and we're gonna do these websites and we're gonna confine them in this specific box. I mean, that's fine for the first couple, but now that we've done this, we should evolve. And so it's a lot of discussion. I won't go into detail about how these are these come into play, but I will say that we are trying to think of more creative ways to run these exercises.
And for us, the model's a little bit different because our group develops our own systems and has sort of active teams working on them. We have an advantage of being able to sort of directly have on-staff software engineers and a bunch of different programs that we run and operate. So I was able to be pretty selective about which applications we chose for this pilot, based on ones that, where I knew that the project manager was going to prioritize security work, where I knew that the program was funded so that this work could continue. And we wanted to focus on public-facing systems for ours. One of the major questions that I wanted to answer in doing this pilot was, in what ways do government systems differ from private sector systems? Like one of our systems in scope is cloud.gov, which is a platform as a service for other government agencies. Heroku for government would be a fine shorthand to describe what it is. So I've run a bug bounty for Heroku, so I know what types of bugs to expect on a platform as a service. And in theory, cloud.gov should look pretty different, right? And so I wanted to, be able to understand like what really is different about operating this in a government context. So we were kind of choosing our programs pretty carefully to try to answer those questions. Our starting point was to try to be as boring as possible and to be as sort of average a program. We structured our bounties by asking HackerOne to give us some data and peg our bounties at. I think we started at the 70th percentile across the platform. Like we wanted to be a little better than average, but not by a lot. Like we wanted to be kind of boring and average and to see where the differences actually exist, and not just assume, oh, we're government, so therefore we're different. We wanted to actually be able to prove that we're different with data and with experience.
I'd like to hear a little bit more about your recruitment efforts, because that's an interesting question. The government has to compete for talent. But first, who in this room has worked for government before? About 10%. Who would consider working for government at some point in their lives? Yikes. So, well, go ahead, guys, make the case, because they're all saying, everyone's probably sitting here thinking, I make good money, I've got a cool job, living in San Francisco. Why chuck all that to go, make a quarter of the money in Washington?
I mean, it's impact, right? So, like, we have an enormous lever. Like, yeah, the government moves slow, and yeah, we don't get paid super well, but we can, like, when you can get the full force of the US government behind something, holy crap, you can do amazing things. As someone operating a private bug bounty, I have to take, security standards like those written by NIST as set in stone. As a government employee, I can go talk to NIST and tell them that I think that there are issues with their security standards. An example is they just released their latest draft of the digital identity standards. And NIST is no longer recommending SMS as a good second factor for multi-factor authentication because of basically how easy it is to take over and spoof someone's cell phone account. That's there because of comments that our agency and others wrote asking them to make a change there. Like, that's going to have a direct impact. That's going to trickle down to PCI and to HIPAA and to ISO, whatever it is. That's going to drive a major change in behavior across the entire security industry towards stronger forms of multi-factor authentication, like hard tokens. That's a lever that I would never have as a private citizen, and that will probably be the most meaningful impact that I will ever have on the security industry as a whole, and it wouldn't have been possible if I hadn't taken a pay cut. Didn't have to move to DC. 18F is a fully distributed team. We're in 35 states or something like that. So,
I've been kind of thinking about this the last couple of weeks on how do you get people motivated to come and work for federal government, or DoD for that matter. And I bring it back to this. I mean, there's work and then there's meaningful work, right? And I will say that within DDS and DOD, you will do meaningful work. You can always go back to your job and what you've been doing in security or being a CISO, but being able to jump into the most highest levels of the Department of Defense and work with high ranking military leaders and government officials and helping them fortify security and DoD assets. I mean, there's no other meaningful work that I've done anyway that can even compare to what a person can do within DoD on our team. I mean, for example, I just got a notification today from our team that Neil Tyson DeGrassi and Eric Schmidt were so interested in the work we're doing that they're coming to our office to see all the projects that we're doing. Now, I can't list all the projects that we're doing up here, but if you are ever in DC, you should stop by, shoot me an email, let me know, and I will personally give you a tour and show you all the fucking cool things that we're working on. I mean, so cool that it has, you know, everyone from SecDef to DepSecDef's office highly interested. And the unique thing about our group is that we are able to push the envelope like we did for Hack the Pentagon. No one in their minds would have thought that, hey, we're going to hack the Pentagon today and we're going to see what the outcome is. It took a lot of work. A lot of people on our team and within the government, federal government, have the scar tissues because we had to push through the bureaucracy. And that's part of the work, right? It's not always cool. It's not always coming into an office that's laid out in Star Wars paraphernalia and having whiteboards as for walls as a space that makes it cool. No, you're actually able to work with military leaders, in some cases help save lives and be able to really make a difference. So then I bring it back to my original statement. There's work and then there's work that matters. And within DoD, you are guaranteed you're going to do work that matters. We're only appointed for 2 years with the option to do 2 more. I have yet to see anyone to take that second option. But again, it's the most meaningful work that I've ever done.
What about the culture, though? I mean, hackers are a very distinct set of people, and their regard for the government is skeptical. And as a journalist, I understand why. Heard what Sammy was describing. I mean, you know, kind of not jailed, but paroled for 3 years for messing with MySpace, or Aaron Schwartz, or, you know, those stories go on and on. How do you sort of create a hacker culture within the government and make sure you're left alone and be able to get your job done and be respected?
Yeah, so you want to go?
One of the interesting things is a really wide variety of opinion within the government. Like, government employees do not have a monolithic opinion on those questions. You may have read the Secretary of what's his name, Robert Rothstein. I'm blanking on his title, Department of Justice, had some comments on encryption that a lot of security researchers were sort of scared about. There's a really healthy debate on that happening within the government as well as outside of it. And there is, I mean, the US government has 1.5 million employees. Like, it's a diverse group, and there's room for a hacker culture within that. I think everyone really recognizes that. And like I said earlier, I think there's a real appetite for improvement and change, at least within the sort of digital space. Like, everybody is pretty aware that the way that we're practicing security is not working, and we need to do things better. And there's a really healthy appetite to change that. And so I think one of the ways we get past that skepticism is by showing results. We show that things are changing. We show that we're doing new things like these programs. We show that the Department of Justice just put out guidelines for writing vulnerability disclosure policies for other government agencies, which provide sort of a template and a way of thinking about how agencies can say, if you tell us about issues, we won't prosecute you, which is basically what a vulnerability disclosure policy is. And their guidance is actually fairly, it's pretty good, and it's fairly broad. Like, they are reasonably comfortable in this official guidance with agencies saying, yeah, if you tell us responsibly, we'll fix it, and we won't there won't be any ramifications. There is a sea change happening, and it is changing fairly quickly, and it's changing because people get past their skepticism of government and realize that the way that we make government, one of the ways we can make our government into the one we want is by joining it, is by coming in and helping it be what we want out of it.
What about the current administration, though? And I don't mean that as like a cheap shot at the Trump administration, but it seems a lot of these initiatives began under Obama's sort of tech surge projects. And do they still have the momentum to continue? Because I think the current president does not seem especially engaged with tech. Has that sort of affected your world at all?
Our work is nonpartisan. I mean, we don't take a position on what the government should do. Our position is that if the government's going to do a thing, it should do it well and it should do it cheaply. And I don't think that that's a partisan opinion.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we're out there, technology evolves, and government has been slow to kind of keep up with technology, and we know that there are broken systems out there, and we want to highlight those as much as possible. And then going back to your original question, the relationship with hackers, about a year ago before the VDP, before DoD launched the VDP, we didn't have, it was a cease and desist letter that was sent out to whoever brought up and said, hey, you have this critical bug, or there's this cross-site scripting you may want to fix, and they would get a cease and desist letter. Now we welcome vulnerabilities through the VDP, right? And I think as our program grows, we welcome to bridge that relationship with the researcher/hacker community. A lot of you didn't raise your hands, and rightfully so, for not wanting to work in federal government, but I will say if you have participated in the bug bounties, and I met some of you last night, then you guys are serving, right? In a different capacity. You guys are serving and helping fortify our assets. So even if you don't want to move to DC, or you don't want to work at the Pentagon or within the federal government, I urge all you hackers and researchers to participate in these bug bounties, because you guys are providing a service to your nation.
I'd like to turn over for questions in just a minute, and feel free to come up with hard questions for these guys. It is the government, but before we do that, I've got one more. Can you give us a couple examples of some successes you've had? I know the stuff you have, the programs, like we got this many bugs, but give us one or two specifics. Like, what did you fix?
So I want to tell two stories. So the first one is that we have started seeing almost everything that 18F does is open source. 99% plus of our work is open source and on GitHub. We have started seeing security researchers who found out about our programs through the bug bounty filing non-security related pull requests against the open source project. So someone found like a style bug and filed a pull request to fix it over on GitHub. Just so cool. Like we're getting more attention from people on our programs, and they're willing to help out in non-transactional ways just because they found a CSS issue and wanted to fix it. So that's been one really, really cool success. Another one is not any particular issue, but the experiences of some of the program managers who have been involved have made me really happy. So the way our bounty is structured, I don't take a very active role in managing our bounties. The individual program managers for the applications are direct. They're on HackerOne. They're interacting with hackers directly. They're managing their teams and fixing the issues. My role and the role of the other security folks on the project are essentially consultants. We'll say, maybe you should take another look at this issue, or, are you sure that's invalid? I'm not sure I agree, but at the end of the day, they make all the calls. I've heard from a couple of the folks who are program managers that they have really leveled up in their own understanding of security and security issues, and are thinking more clearly and cogently about the risks in their programs going forward because of those direct interactions with hackers, because being able to sort of directly learn about and starting to learn the way that security researchers think. And I'm pretty convinced that experience is going to translate not just to sort of fixed transactional fixed issues now, but a more secure development cycle going forward, because these program managers and engineers will have the experience of having worked directly with security researchers and starting to kind of think in that way. And I think that could be a lot more valuable than any individual issue that we fixed.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just highlight one. So when Hack the Pentagon was run, it really showed the weakness in how the DoD does software development, as well as how they remediate or fix these vulnerabilities, right? So when these discussions were initially happening, the remediation time was, I guess, a couple of weeks, and so the ongoing conversations with how we approach software development and as well as fixing these vulnerabilities needed to be, I guess, modernized, quote unquote. And so to be able to reevaluate how the government or how DoD does software development, how they run bug bounty programs, and how we scale that was all proven out of that pilot and to be a successful model. So, I mean, that was a big win that we were able to prove with one exercise.
Great. I'd love to turn over to you guys. Please, anyone has a question for the government folks, please speak up. I'm going to start in the back and then go to the gentleman in the front.
Yeah, so I have a question for, like, I'm not sure if it falls into your jurisdiction or not, but NASA is one of, it comes under the government. So I was interested in knowing if you have a program for that. So I have come across several US release, government release, and open source applications which NASA provides to anyone online. And we have come across several vulnerabilities in those, but we just wanted to know if there is some motivation in terms of a bounty, or if there is some ramification in case we report and then we are told, like, cease and desist, as you said earlier. So thank you.
So neither of us are part of NASA. That's a different agency. I do know some folks there, and I know NASA tends to be on the leading edge of getting technology, let's say. I don't know off the top of my head if NASA has a vulnerability disclosure program or not. That's the first thing to check. Oh, I'm seeing Alex saying they do. Okay, so NASA has a vulnerability disclosure program. So look, as someone who might be interested in researching vulnerabilities in a government system, you need to look for the VDP first, because that's what protects you from, that's what protects you, and that's what outlines how the agency wants issues to be reported. If it doesn't exist, I think it's still too risky for a citizen to report an issue without a VDP. That's a personal opinion, not the opinion of a government or whatever. But you can by all means reach out and encourage them to have one. In situations where they do, check it out, follow it, and you should. The existence of a VDP indicates two things. First, that you'll be safe reporting an issue, but also that the agency takes this stuff seriously and is more likely than not to fix the issue, to treat you well, to be happy to hear from you, as opposed to kind of roll in their eyes. So look for that VDP and follow it.
Or maybe Martin, you can call NASA your next client. Names. Next question here, please.
Thank you. I know that many of the cybersecurity jobs in government require clearances. Sometimes secret or top secret clearances, but I'm wondering how eligible are dual citizens, American citizens with with citizenship in another country, or that are married to foreigners. How eligible are they to get a security clearance without renouncing their other citizenship?
This is going to differ really widely from agency to agency, and probably even from job to job. I don't have a clearance and have no intention of getting one. I don't need one for the work that I do. But other people, even within GSA, do have clearances and do require it for the jobs that they do. So it's going to differ really widely. Your best bet is to talk to a recruiter or someone from HR from the specific agency in question, because it's going to be the answer is going to be super broad.
And at DoD, we all have clearances from working, obviously, at the Pentagon. But if you are seriously thinking about it, I mean, we can connect after, and we can ask the right people and see what that path looks like.
Thank you.
Sir in the middle, and then the gentleman behind you after that.
So my question is a little bit on the technical side. So I know for government, like in general, they're always super protective about their networks, like adversaries, like poking around and looking around the networks. So when you open up like a Pentagon program or any like system for hackers to like poke around, then you are inheriting a risk that someone might poke around and not disclose those vulnerabilities. So the question I'm asking more on the technical side is like, how are you sandboxing that? Or how are you doing it in your programs and separating that production environment, and what tools, technologies you're using to make sure that, you know, external governments or attackers are not just poking around, and because there's no real way for you to know if that's like someone from HackerOne trying to poke around or someone bad. And now they have like a legal way to do it too. So like, have you thought of that? How do you strategize for it? And what tools and techniques you use to like prevent yourself from it?
It varies from system to system, right? And I don't want to go too much into detail on the network security side of things, but I will say that there's probably room for improvement. And every time we run these exercises, there are, whether it's private or public bug bounties, that we do find weaknesses that are pretty similar across systems. So I'll leave it at that.
And we operate almost exclusively public-facing systems. So it's on the internet. And we so far are not, you know, we have things like cloud.gov where you need to have a .gov email to sign up for an account. So far we haven't sort of crossed the bridge to giving hackers accounts. We may in the future. That's a thing that could be useful. But right now we're a lot more interested in sort of the public-facing profile, security profile. So that's kind of what we're focusing on.
So one thing that's been alluded to a bit in this panel and during Sammy's talk as well was what I think a lot of researchers would perceive as overly heavy-handed prosecution of security research. And again, you sort of touched upon that with the VRP. I think a lot of this stems with, I think, technical illiteracy, or at least people in our law enforcement community that don't have the sort of technical awareness about what exactly would constitute like a well-intentioned researcher versus something a bit more malicious. Like, if we take that as a problem, what do you think the steps are to address that in the government community in terms of technical literacy and so forth?
Come join us. I mean, seriously though, like that's 18F's entire philosophy is like the way we improve the government's technical literacy is by having more technically literate people in the government. And I can tell you personally, I've been able to punch way above my weight and be in rooms that I really am not qualified to be in just because I have a technical competency, the other people there. Like, folks are willing to listen. There's just a lack of deeply qualified people to share information within the government. I do think that that's changing. You know, groups like ours, groups like DDS, there are digital services popping up in other agencies. Like, as I've been hammering this over and over again, like the government is not unaware of this problem, and most people are fairly aligned on trying to fix it. It's a big ship and it takes a while to turn, but I do see it turning.
Huge gap, right? Huge gap. And so, again, we are given the task of not only fixing things, but educating the constituents at the same time. And sometimes that could be the hardest challenge of the job, and that could be part of the bureaucracy. But I will say that, you know, within the last 6 months with bug bounties, I mean, there's been a lot of interest, not only within DoD, but federal government. Oh, okay, so cross-site scripting, what does that mean? Or how long do these bug bounties last? Okay, so that seems like a good idea. So, you know, with every success, we move closer and closer to bridging that knowledge gap. But it really is people, you know, like us who have been injected in federal government to really educate the people who've been there for 20 years. Some of them still using flip phones, so so that's just
Blackberries.
Yeah,
Blackberries are still a thing.
We're about out of time. One last quick question. Gents, can you please say the worst thing about working for the government and the best thing?
The worst thing are ATOs. Anyone know what an ATO is? Okay, in order to launch a government system, you need something called an authority to operate, which requires that somebody sign off on it, and that somebody is literally personally taking the risk for putting that system out there. It's a terrible system, and it slows launching things down, and it's real bad. And GSA probably has the most streamlined and the most efficient ATO process of any other agency, and it's still pretty bad.
And the best thing?
Like I said, the best thing is that lever. Like when you get all the pieces together and when you're able to corral the resources at your disposal, you can do amazing things.
The worst thing for me is probably DC summers. If you haven't been in high humidity, high temperature environments, I literally had to go shop for new clothes that were moisture wicking and pack an extra pair of clothes. The best thing is really meaningful work, right? You're able to, the work we do impacts the service member, the uniform members, and being part of DoD and watching what these people do and standing shoulder to shoulder with them, see them walking through the Pentagon and seeing that what you're doing is impactful. It's probably the best thing that really gets me going every single day.
Great. Well, everyone, please give Jacob and Mike a hand for speaking to us and also for what they're doing for the country. Thank you, guys.